Hello everyone and welcome to your first APES screencast. In this screencast, we are going to cover sections 1 and 2 of chapter 1. Every chapter starts off with a case study, which is an important or notable example of something that the chapter covers. In chapter 1, we look at a vision for a sustainable future, a future in which the Earth's natural systems and human cultural systems survive, flourish, and adapt into the very long-term future. In order to accomplish that, we have to change our attitudes and our behavior in a way that will lead to a much better future for the planet. One alarming sign is the human population, which is currently 7.8 billion people, and it's going to be 8 billion by the end of 2030. As this political cartoon shows, we're facing a cliff, and we're not sure how we're going to feed this many people and continue to feed them into the future. Every section starts off with a title slide or title slides with bullet points of the main ideas in the section. As you study, make sure you understand these main ideas, you can explain them, and you can also give examples. As we begin our study of environmental science, there are a couple of terms that you should be familiar with. The environment is everything around us, or our surroundings. We will begin with ecology, and ecology is the study of living things and how they interact with each other and with their environment. One thing we should understand about environmental science is that it's an interdisciplinary science. It brings together many different fields of study. For example, in the natural sciences, it includes ecology, biology, geology, and chemistry. In the social sciences, it includes geography, politics, and economics. And in the humanities, it involves ethics and philosophy. So there's something in environmental science for everyone to get interested in or passionate about. As we consider how to create a sustainable future, we should think of what nature has already been doing for billions of years successfully. 1. We should depend on solar energy, or sunlight. 2. We should value biodiversity. Biodiversity is variety of life, and when you have a variety of life, you can respond to changes or challenges that come at you. 3. We should think of nutrient and chemical cycling. Nature uses, reuses, and recycles materials in nature, and so should we. You will need to have an understanding of what natural capital is. Natural capital is made up of two things: natural resources and ecosystem services. Natural resources are the things that nature provides, things like soil, water, or air. Ecosystem services are the things that nature does, things like purifying air, controlling weather or climate, etc. Ecosystem services can be broken down into 4 different categories: supporting, provisioning, regulating, and cultural. This diagram shows natural capital and how it's broken down into natural resources in blue and ecosystem services in orange. This diagram shows the 4 different types of ecosystem services. There are supporting services, which are the things that nature does to support us or the environment, things like allowing soil to form or moving nutrients around from place to place. There are provisioning services, and those are the things that nature does to provide us with things like food or wood. There are regulating services, and those are things that nature does to help control or maintain things, like controlling weather or climate, or controlling storm damage. There are cultural services, and those are the things that nature does to help us live a certain way or do things that we want to do. Things like recreation or tourism or going out into nature to be spiritual. There are other principles of sustainability from the social sciences we should consider when thinking about a sustainable future. There's full cost pricing. The price of something should reflect the damage it does to the environment as well as the cost of cleaning up whatever it does to the environment. There are win-win solutions. Solutions should benefit all sides. For example, if you buy an electric car, you get a sticker so you can drive in the carpool lane, which benefits you, but it's also benefiting the environment at the same time. Another example is eating insects. It's nutritious for you, but it also benefits the environment because it's better for the environment than eating other forms of animal protein. And lastly, there's a responsibility to future generations. We have to think of what kind of earth we are leaving to our kids and our grandkids and other generations in the future. This infographic just shows those three other principles from the social sciences. We need to think about resources and how we handle our resources if we're to have a sustainable future. And resources refer to anything we obtain from the environment to meet our needs. There are inexhaustible resources, which are resources that will never run out. Things like sunlight, wind, and heat from inside the earth, which we can use to generate electricity. There are also renewable resources, and those are resources that if you use up and give it enough time, it will replace or replenish itself. An example are trees in a forest. If you cut some trees down, but give the forest time for the trees to grow back, then you can then cut them down again. If you cut them down too fast, then you're going to run out of trees in the forest. So you have to think of something called the sustainable yield. That's the amount that you can take, but give the resource enough time to replace or replenish itself. And finally, there are non-renewable resources, and those are resources that if you use up, they will not replace themselves. If you burn oil, coal, or natural gas, they will not replace themselves. If you use up metals or minerals, they will not replace themselves. We need to think about how people in different parts of the world use resources differently. We have people in more developed countries, or MDCs, that use resources at a higher rate than people in less developed countries, or LDCs. More developed countries tend to be highly industrialized, have high incomes, and have high rates of resource consumption. They make up only 17% of the world's population, so it's very lopsided in terms of more developed and less developed countries in the world. In the second section of the chapter, we're going to talk about something called the ecological footprint and think about how our ecological footprints are affecting the Earth. We are living unsustainably, and what that means is that the health and the quality of the environment are decreasing year by year. This has been caused by environmental degradation, or the wasting and depleting of the Earth's natural capital. The pace at which this is happening is actually speeding up, and it is very alarming. We need to think about our human-initiated or anthropogenic activities and what they're doing to the environment, because if we don't, there are economic and ecological consequences that we will have to face. This infographic shows different ways that we are degrading the Earth's natural capital, things like air pollution or climate change, or overfishing the oceans to the point where there's a decline in our ocean fisheries. Pollution is a significant cause of environmental degradation. You should be familiar with point sources of pollution and non-point sources of pollution. Point sources are single, identifiable sources you can point at. Non-point sources are dispersed, spread out sources of pollution. They're normally difficult to identify and difficult to deal with. The trash in this landfill is an example of a non-point source of pollution. These smokestacks at this coal plant are an example of point source pollution. The trash that has accumulated in this river is another example of non-point source pollution. One concept that you will have to familiarize yourselves with is the tragedy of the commons. In the tragedy of the commons, there's a shared resource that people or groups of people are using. If they overuse and overexploit that resource, it will cause the depletion or degradation of that resource. One example is in this photo. This is a pile of buffalo skulls. Buffalo were a shared resource. Anyone could hunt them. But because there were no limits, no laws or rules on the number of buffalo you could hunt, they were hunted to the brink of extinction. So that resource was depleted or degraded over time. This diagram shows the tragedy of the commons in a different way. You have sheep grazing on some land, but if there are no controls over how that land is grazed, it will become overused. One way of looking at your impact on the environment is by measuring something called the ecological footprint. Your ecological footprint is a measure of how much land you would need to sustain your use of natural resources. You can look at a whole group's ecological footprint, or you can look at the ecological footprint per person, which we use the term per capita as well. You have an ecological deficit if your ecological footprint is bigger than what nature can provide, which is called the biological capacity. These graphics show the ecological footprint of different parts of the world. The United States has a very large total ecological footprint and per capita ecological footprint. China, on the other hand, has a large total ecological footprint, but much smaller per capita ecological footprint because its ecological footprint is spread out over a much larger population. IPAT is another way of looking at our impact on the environment. I stands for impact, P stands for population, A stands for affluence, and T stands for technology. And the combination of population, affluence, and technology create our impact on the environment. Less developed countries and more developed countries can both have a large impact on the environment. Less developed countries can have a high impact through high population. More developed countries can have a high impact due to high affluence. China is a good example of how we can use the IPAT equation to look at impact on the environment. China has the world's largest population, it has the world's second largest economy, and it's the largest consumer and producer of cars. And as a result, it has a huge impact on the environment. 2/3 of the world's most polluted cities are in China. In our history, there have been 3 major revolutions, and these 3 revolutions increased our ecological footprint. Those revolutions are the agricultural revolution, the industrial medical revolution, and the information globalization revolution. What we need today is a sustainability revolution to shrink our ecological footprints back down.